handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman, Seat, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder, Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er, 8 9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I have the good fortune of having Jeff Olsted with us, who, by the way, is way up in the Pacific Northwest in Canada. He comes from the medical field. He's also CAD certified and a philosopher. And he was kind enough to accept the invitation to come on so we can talk a little bit about socialism and capitalism. I'm not sure that how we ended up with such socialism being in the entire political debate here in the last couple of years, but it's upon us. So with that, welcome, Jeff, and thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Hello. Well, I do kind of wonder where we should start. You want to?
Look,
to dig in with socialism or versus capitalism. Huh?
Yeah, let me kind of start this way, and it's kind of curious because even in the United States here in the public school systems, even at the high school level, they're really not teaching the fundamental of business operations. And then in college, if you want to take any kind of business course, you have to kind of declare that that's the direction you're going for, your degree. So even basic economics is not necessarily taught there. So, Jeff, we're not planting the seed early in the education system, are we, on the difference between capitalism and socialism?
We're not planting the seed at all. The entire education system, right from kindergarten all the way through the PhD, is entirely socialist based. Mm-hmm. It's we're gearing all of our kids, teenagers, young adults to get some sort of a socialist type job. Get into government, get into even the medical industry is mostly paid for by government programs. Even the insurance companies, they're heavily regulated by government. But we're not really taught at any point that I can find that the core of our life, it has to be surrounded by a kind of a profit-generating idea. Creating a value, selling it for a profit, and when you buy something, you buy it with the knowledge that person is making a profit too. So it's always a win-win thing. If we try to set up any sort of a business I'm a Canadian, but our systems are very similar.
Mm-hmm.
We're taxed to death. If I sell something, legally I'm supposed to pay about 30-35% of that is supposed to be taxed that I pay to the government. And there might not be enough money in that little enterprise for it to be worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
And,
you bring up kind of a good point here, Jeff, because I think the consumer doesn't necessarily understand the difference sometimes either between capitalism and socialism, meaning under the capitalistic model, the consumer has a choice. So they can shop around, they can create their own loyalty, or they can choose not to do business with somebody at all. Under socialism, there's not a choice. You have to do it under whatever government entity allows to be out there. So, the free thought, the buying habits are all changed. So you bring up a very good point. Irrespective necessarily of profit, correct?
In the United States, you guys have the best system in the world. Still, everybody that ever thought of immigrating from somewhere else wants to go to the States. Your Constitution set the mold for this world we live in for the last 300 years. I'm a big fan of your Constitution. But,
we're not protecting it very well.
No, you're not protecting it very well. It is under attack constantly. Freedom of speech has just been kicked around the block for the last couple of years, and there was actually a Supreme Court case only a few months ago. I was really happy to hear about it. A Supreme Court justice passed whatever they do, and freedom of speech is protected now in the States. And I was really happy to hear about that. I'd have to look it up for you to tell you the exact numbers on it, but the profit motive, you see, even though you guys have the best country in the world, people still think like socialists, and I was talking to a friend of mine just a couple of days ago, and I started trying to talk to him about socialism, and he didn't even know what socialism was, because we are so entrenched in it. It just is. Socialism just is, and nobody can really even get their head around the idea of becoming consciously aware of the fact that we are socialists, and we don't have to be socialist. It was a choice that was made, a long time ago, and we ran with it, but it's not working. Socialism is a disastrous idea for a political concept. And if we could become, even conscious of the fact that we are socialists, and it doesn't work worth beans, we might just have a chance to, warm up to the idea that, capitalism, it doesn't really hurt anybody. Anybody working on any sort of enterprise, in their own home, trying to make something that they think they can sell for a profit.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. That is a good thing. That is absolutely how we should all think. And when we're trying to think of these little improvements that we can do, that we can sell, and then all of a sudden everybody gets down on you about it. You're a money grubber. You're some kind of a rangy that would sell your own mother for spare parts. No,
Yeah.
that's not what it's about. Values are about everything that you value. Your spouse, your children, your family. That is stuff that is valuable to you. And when you sell something for a profit, it benefits you, and in turn benefits everything and everyone that you value.
And the consumer.
Well, when you use the word consumer, it does point to the philosophy that you're speaking for. If you're talking about profit, it's more of a trader philosophy. Consumer philosophy, that's a philosophy that is more socialist in nature, because they don't think of themselves as producing anything to sell. There's a lot more detail there than I was planning to go into today,
socialism takes away invention. It takes away necessarily competition. It removes the free market. And I would say thought. I would say independent thinking.
It kicks it in the teeth.
Yeah. And so, Canada. What are people not getting about it in Canada? Are there some that are complaining, or they just kind of roll with it and just don't care?
Oh, in Canada, we are immersed in socialism. The few businesses that we have run practically without profit. The government departments are more interested in the environment and fish and trees and there's even in the federal government there is even a portfolio for old buildings. But one strange thing that I noticed, there is no department for business. The best that we have is what they call consumer and corporate affairs.
What is that?
What
is that?
Basically, what that ends up being is consumers against the corporate affairs. It represents the consumers against business. It doesn't really stand up for business hardly at all.
Wow.
If you want to, like, for example, if you wanted to open up a mine in this country, it would probably take you 10 years just to get through the what do they call them?
The bureaucracy. And they have to pay off a few bribes.
They're allowed to have public hearings.
Oh God.
And they can have public hearings all the way from the mine all the way to the ocean. Anywhere in between, they can complain about whatever they want. There's no rules or regulations that a mine operator can rely on. They have to get permission from everyone, which is almost impossible. there's no way they can, plan a budget. I would like to see a department of government that is strictly to do with business. Sitting in the middle of a room of socialists, they would practically be the devil's advocate. But if they could stand up for business, that would be a huge help, I think.
Well, what does business stand up for business?
Business hardly even stands up for itself, much less anybody else.
Okay.
Business has to do what it has to do. It has to make deals with socialists. It has to cheat. It has to. I don't know everything that a businessman has to do to survive in this world, but it's kind of sounds kind of nauseating what they have to do, and it shouldn't be that way. They should be able to concentrate on making their product, making whatever it is that's valuable that they think they can sell. They shouldn't have to worry about getting stabbed in the back by the tax man or getting some regulation that they didn't they weren't consciously aware of when they got started. It drops on them like a load of bricks. Or I remember in 2011 the U.S. Fish and Wildlife sent an actual SWAT team to the Gibson guitar factory. And
they sure
and
did.
Hijacked $500,000 worth of wood that is very hard to get.
And computers.
Oh yeah, they took the computers too. I don't know how Gibson got back into business as quick as they did, but it all burned down to a clerical error on a form. And come on, a SWAT team?
Yeah.
With guns?
A
guitar factory.
I'm happy you remind us of that. We tend to forget that little that scandal, and that went on, Jeff, for a long time. It was
did go on for quite a while.
Yeah, several years before Gibson was able to necessarily recover itself fully.
Yeah, they had to make some concessions. I wasn't comfortable with, but I knew they had to do it to survive, and that's one of those hard decisions that businessmen have to make. And I remember the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the U.S. Of the United States had the owner of that factory sit in his box at Congress while the president was making a speech one day, not that long after. I never heard of such a thing ever. Like that just doesn't happen. It must have been a huge scandal. A lot of stuff that we didn't hear about happened. But like that could happen to anybody. Like that's the way the U.S. government is set up right now. That wasn't the last SWAT team that hit an employer for a clerical error. That's just one that made a lot of, it got a lot of press, that one. If you look online, you can find them. But
what did the Canadians think of that case? They just didn't care? Indifferent?
I couldn't find any interest in it one way or the other.
Interesting.
Every time I try to talk to people in Canada about this, they always tell me, "Oh, why am I worried about what's happening in the States?" Well, the United States is still pretty well the center of economy in the world. They, you guys might lose that status if you don't get your country and your economy together, but you still have it for now, and that, I believe that's good and important. Now, you should try and talk to somebody about profit, see what they say. Oh, they'll probably jump right down your throat.
Well, what do we need to do? I mean, we obviously are working very hard to hold on to what we have here. Do we need to begin to help influence the Canadians such that we have a whole, essentially North American model here that is thriving, or what?
We have tried to have a North American free trade agreement, Canada, the U.S. and Mexico. I'm not sure it can work with so much socialism mixed into it.
Mm-hmm.
You see, we have to think more business minded. We have to think in terms of an honest profit. So long as the government is trying to run it, it runs on taxes, so it ends up being a socialist-minded place. It just can't help itself. I've tried to theorize how you could make a government think more business-minded, but it's just impossible. It's conceived as a socialist organization, and it just can't seem to ever shake it. There's no way out of it.
Well, Jeff, socialism really came into prevalence around from France. That was the genesis of socialism. So I guess therein lies a lot of the influence on Canada. We don't like France very much in the United States. So perhaps, just on that basis alone in history, that might be a jumping off point. But you mentioned at the top about profit, and profit is I think, rightly so, the important component here, because profit is a motive for everybody. You want to make some money, and it's become it's a pejorative. It's a bad thing. So that's
the way people think. Yes.
So maybe it ought to be challenged in the education system. Do you think?
Oh, that would be a dream come true if they would start with that in the first grade. But it's a huge. It would be a basic change in the way the education system is run, and where to start with that? Well, that's why I thought, if we could just get people thinking that profit is a good thing. If we could just do that one thing, then anything that they say in school that says a profit is a bad thing would be suspect,
Well, I guess in Canada, you guys are trading taxes for profit, of which you can tax.
Oh, man.
But here, we're about a profit and loss statement. We're about a balance sheet and success, and we in the business climate, we're trying to teach success. It sounds like in Canada they just kind of want to roll along, and tomorrow looks like yesterday, right?
Well, we're going down the tubes, but that's another subject.
Well, you need to keep writing, and you need to keep kind of I don't know, I'd be sending some letters, I'd be doing some op-eds in the newspapers and getting on local TV. I mean, we at least just passed a tax plan here in the United States that is encouraging an awful lot of business, such that, business had been sitting on so much money that they're now giving the bonuses back to the employees, and a lot of them are even getting raises. So Canada, might want to take a long look at that, and Canadians to challenge their own government.
Yeah. Well, I talk mostly about the States because I believe that there's more hope there than there is in Canada.
It sounds like it.
But the people that anybody that wants to get money from government, they're
not a problem.
every single cent of that money is paid by taxes.
Exactly.
That came from a rather large percentage of that little bit that was left over that was known as profit. So anybody that wants a cent from the government is kind of a hypocrite.
Exactly.
They want money from the government, but they
don't understand.
They're against profit.
Jeff, we want to thank you for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Fascinating conversation, and appreciate your perspective and comparisons. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you these two 24/7 streams of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. Talk America Radio is a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. Please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. You can contribute monthly or send us a one-time amount. We'll put it to good use continuing to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Hi, this is Captain Matt Bruce from the Captain's America Third Watch, and you're listening to Talk America Radio, the new dominant force in conservative talk radio.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia.
And Don Newen from Cowboy Logic Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go to sleep every night completely fatigued from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place,
then you're simply not doing enough. Join us every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for Cowboy Logic Radio.
Let the restoration begin.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia. And WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Denise Simon Experience. Hope everybody is well. Just want to tell you that sometimes old things just never seem to go away, and maybe they shouldn't until they're resolved. When they don't get resolved, we have the Pacific Legal Foundation, my favorite law firm. And Jeff McCoy has been kind enough to join us here because we want to talk about that little pesky thing called the Antiquities Act, and the thing that President Trump undid, that Barack Obama created, but it hasn't settled yet, has it, Jeff?
No, it has not, and thanks for having me back on again to discuss the important issue. But you're absolutely right. It has not resolved, and we're going to continue to fight.
Well, thanks for staying with this issue, because I mean, there are so many other things in the headlines, but there's a lot of other wheels of motion that just never seem to go to idle or even in reverse. And you sometimes think that, okay, we heard about that, that's in the past, and then people yawn and keep going. But in this case, I think there's several lawsuits here, is there not? And I think they're necessarily consolidating some of them in one or two, instead of having them all separate. Is that right?
Yeah, so just to remind your listeners, back in December of 2016, in the final month of his administration, President Obama created a 1.35 million acre national monument in Utah. Just last December, President Trump reduced that to 200,000 acres. Many environmental groups, and then also Patagonia, the multi-million dollar clothing company, sued, saying that President Trump's decision was illegal. And yesterday, Pacific Legal Foundation, on behalf of some Utahns and some Utah recreationist organizations, filed a lawsuit to intervene in filed a motion to intervene in Patagonia's lawsuit. And you are correct, there are 3 separate lawsuits that have challenged the reduction in the Bears Ears National Monument, and they most likely will be consolidated. They have not yet been, but we are seeking to get involved to defend the decision, President Trump's decision, on behalf of these Utahns.
We also have we have the Navajo Nation. I think we've got a couple other Hopi tribe that are also yet part of another component of the lawsuit against what Trump did too. Correct?
Yeah, there are tribal organizations who filed one lawsuit. The one that we have asked to enter in was Patagonia and some other environmental organizations, and then there was one other lawsuit with a bunch of the other environmental organizations, Wilderness Society, and Natural Resources Defense Council, others filed as well.
So let's kind of take a little bit of a refresher here. The Obama administration, they did this thing using the Antiquities Act as the basis via executive order. Is that correct?
Yeah, what the exact name is a presidential proclamation, but it's very similar to an executive order. Okay. And you're right, the Antiquities Act was a law passed in 1906 that was supposed to be used to protect antiquities, as the name said, and it's supposed to be small areas to protect these antiquities and other objects, but it has grown, and as evidenced by the Bears Ears National Monument, grown in enormous size to where now presidents are reserving over 1 million acres, which is not the smallest size compatible with protection of antiquities.
And so Trump comes through there and he does his own. Did he do a presidential proclamation, or did he do an executive order to unwind not all of what Obama did, but certainly a large share of what Obama did? And
he also did a presidential proclamation. Yeah, it was also a presidential proclamation, and it was to downsize it from 1.35 million acres to 200,000 acres. So there still is a significant amount of land that is a national monument, but he reduced it about the size of Delaware, to give your listeners some sort of perspective.
All right. What is there a distinct advantage of having necessarily, I would say, public land or then land that is protected under Antiquities Act? I mean, is there some other layered kind of thing here that it was prudent to reduce the size of this land mass?
Absolutely, because with the monument designation, there are restrictions on how people can use the land. And just an example from some of our clients that we're representing, Sandy and Gail Johnson are ranchers that have been ranching the land since the 1970s, and they've looked at other ranchers in Utah, and we have a good idea of what will happen because there's the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument right by in Utah. And in that case, the number of cattle that ranchers were allowed to graze was reduced. There was restrictions on how they could move fences and water lines, which obviously interferes with the ranching operations. And so if the Bears Ears National Monument was able to continue, it would have been there in the Johnson's entire grazing allotment. And so now that it has been reduced, they are working under the conditions that they've been working under for the last 40 years, which, make no mistake, there are laws and regulations in order to protect the resources there. It's just that a monument designation puts further restrictions, mostly unnecessary restrictions on this use of land.
Do any of these Indian tribes have a cattle operation?
I know that there are some members of the tribes that have cattle operations, I believe, and there are some members of the tribes that opposed the monument, even though the tribes themselves were in favor of the monument. And so it affects a lot of people in the area, including tribal members.
Mm-hmm. Now, reducing this down to 200,000 acres, it then, I would say it's got a revenue source. If it had stayed, on the larger parcel, on the Obama parcel size, then there is no revenue stream to that. Did I say that right? Is that possibly a component of this?
Well, and I think one example, again, going back to grazing, they do have to pay they obviously, when they make money, when ranchers, they'll pay local and state taxes. They also pay fees for grazing, and so when that is restricted, the revenue from that aspect would be affected and would be diminished by the monument designation.
And the same would necessarily hold true, Jeff, on mining?
Yeah, on mining, on timber, depending on the type of monument. It is a little arid in the Bears Ears area, so I'm not sure how much timber is going on, but yes, mining and timber and it also would affect the revenue stream.
What is Patagonia's beef?
Well, they claim in their complaint that there's a lot of good rock climbing in the area, which I'm sure there is. Yeah. And they claim that without a monument designation, they won't be able to rock climb, which is they've been allowed to rock climb before the monument. They'll be able, before the monument was established, they'll continue to be able to, and a monument's not necessary to protect the rock climbing. And in fact, the monument designation hurts other recreational uses of the land. One of our clients, Brandon Sulcer, he was diagnosed as a quadriplegic, but he still likes the outdoors. But of course, he has to use motorized vehicles to access the land. And when a monument's designated, there's more restrictions on motor vehicles being used and on roads being built in the monument, which hurts those who need to use vehicles to enjoy the outdoors. So, in fact, Patagonia's position is restricting how people can recreate in the land, and they're not promoting recreation. They're only promoting a certain narrow type of recreation that benefits their company.
Jeff, I'm going to be a snot again. I would say there's probably, and I'm going to just throw a number out there. I cannot imagine that there are more than 2,000 rock climbers that are making constant and exceptional use of bear's ears. Conversely, I would also say those that use, like your client that's, defending what Trump did, and using other types of recreational activities is probably in the number of 2,000. I'm just throwing the number out. It could be 5 and 5, but we're not talking about a bunch of people here. And I find this judge is going to have to sit here and say, we're going through all of this when there's no conceptual alteration in the true conditions on unwinding Obama's presidential proclamation. I mean, it was fine. Everything was great and wonderful because Patagonia didn't have a problem before Obama's proclamation. They had a problem after it. And now it is really kind of going back to where it was, isn't it, Jeff?
Absolutely. And I don't know exactly how many people use it. It is fairly remote, but I think you got the point exactly right. The Patagonia, their customers are still going to be able to rock climb. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many of them there are, but they're still going to be able to rock climb in this area. And so are other people like Brandon. And then there's also going to be other uses like the Johnsons and the ranching. And everybody's going to be able to enjoy and use the land while under the President Obama's designation, the uses would have been much
limited.
More restrictive.
Yeah. I'm not even sure this is an environmental, Greenpeace kind of thing. I would think. Let me try this one. Where is the state of Utah in this? I mean, does the state of Utah get a voice in what happens going forward with the presidential proclamation versus the presidential proclamation?
Well, prior to the President Obama's designation, the entire congressional delegation of Utah opposed it. A significant majority of the legislature opposed it, but their voice was ignored. So they do have a voice, but it is limited, and part of the reason why it's important to limit the use of the Antiquities Act is because it takes more federal control over these lands in Utah, and it makes the Utah state government have even less of a voice than they already have.
I think, being Pacific Legal Foundation and kind of looking at all the piece parts of this particular case, you guys must be absolutely scratching your head. So I think it would be fun to kind of defend this in court on what, Trump did. I mean, I see the arguments as almost being kind of ridiculous here. And I don't know, it'd be fun watching this in a courtroom because they didn't have a problem 5 years ago, 3 years ago, but all of a sudden, well, we got all these issues and we're going to hire all these lawyers and we're going to defend, some kind of natural resource and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. When does this go to court, Jeff? Or is this just going to be a paperwork kind of thing?
It will probably mostly be on the paperwork. These types of cases take a long time. Right now, we're still in the very, very early stages. We have filed on behalf of our clients. We've asked to join the case, and then there will be some briefing on the legal issues, which, as we've discussed before, the legal claims by Patagonia are spurious. They claim that it's illegal to downsize the monument, despite the fact that 7 previous presidents prior to President Trump downsized national monuments. There's
really?
Yes, and there's a long precedent of downsizing national monuments, and that's one of the issues with the Antiquities Act is it's pretty much unilateral on the decision making, and part of the the reform effort is to make sure that this is not a unilateral decision anymore, that Congress has an input, which would make these monuments, one, a lot of interest would have to be protected or have some input into a monument decision. But in the long run, it might actually make the monuments more secure because it's not just going to be one president making a decision, another president changing that decision. So I would think that even those on the other side would want some reform to the Antiquities Act.
Yeah, I would think. Does the EPA have a voice in this, or the timber industry at all?
Well, the EPA does not. The main agencies are the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service. The timber industry, like I said, I don't know how strong the timber industry is in Utah, but other national monuments, there was one in Oregon that President Obama designated, and the timber industry has gotten involved in a case challenging that monument. So while the timber industry may not be involved in the Bears Ears case, monuments do affect that industry in other places.
What court is this? I mean, will it end up in the Ninth Circuit in some way?
No, it is in the federal district court in D.C., and then the appellate court would also be in D.C.
You know, I may be overstepping my thought pattern here, but if this is almost as though these cases trying to unwind what Trump did is really challenging his executive authority. We've seen it challenge his executive authority challenged on executive orders as we have seen in the Ninth Circuit, most recently under the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals, DACA. But this almost is telling me that they're challenging his authority to sign a presidential proclamation, but it was okay for Obama to do that. Am I overthinking it?
Well, it is challenging his executive authority, and as I said before, I mean, part of the problem with the Antiquities Act is that it is unilateral, and you really can't have it both ways. If they thought that President Obama could create such a large national monument, then a president can reduce a national monument as well. And if they don't want this to happen, then there will need to be some reforms to the Antiquities Act.
You may or may not know this, but Obama did this with water in the Atlantic Northeast. And so I guess my question is somebody going to challenge? I mean, if Trump goes, whoa, we need to save that fishing industry and recreation industry there, boating and whatnot, would this have any kind of effect on what Obama did in that realm?
Well, yeah, and we are involved. We are representing some Massachusetts.
I thought you were
lobstermen in that case, and have challenged because the Antiquities Act only applies to land, and so we've challenged that monument designation. There hasn't been a whole lot of effort to downsize that monument. There has been discussions on opening up fishing on the monument, but I do suspect that you're right. If there are decisions that either reduce that monument or at least change the monument, that groups will challenge any decision to reduce that monument, and the precedent, I think, will
be there. What do they call it? Standing.
Yeah. Well, it's the same argument. It would be a similar argument that the Antiquities Act doesn't allow a reduction. And so if a success in the Bears Ears case would have effect on any other monument that was reduced.
Including water.
Including water.
Fascinating. One thing, I mean, you just can't have a narrow, thin, shallow topic here anymore when it comes to legalness, can you? I mean, one thing always kind of spills over into another case. So this one's pretty interesting, such that these don't go away. Now, you just got essentially petition to join this Bears Ears case in the last week or so?
Yeah, yesterday we filed the motion to enter the case.
Okay. and then it goes to a judge here at what point do you think? Or is it a 30-day thing, or you said it was going to drag out?
Well, the judge will first have to decide within about 30 days, maybe a little bit longer. The judge will have to decide whether our clients do have a sufficient interest to join the case. And then these things usually drag out for a couple months and eventually, though, the legal issues will be briefed, and the judge will have to decide whether or not President Trump's decision was legal.
This is in district court in D.C. We have this Judge Tanya Chutkan. Is that right? Chutkan?
Yes. Yeah.
Where does Judge Tanya normally fall down on? What side of a case does she normally fall on?
I don't have a lot of experience with her yet, so I can't really answer that question. Hopefully, I mean, this should be straightforward, but with any litigation, you never know what the ultimate outcome will be.
Oh, Lord. Well, does she have a period of time? I mean, that she has to render a decision after, all submitted material is in? I mean, so you're looking at what, May or June, perhaps?
We would like to. I think even May or June may be a little early. Hopefully, we can get something over the summer. Judges, while there are some time limits on when everything has to be filed, ultimately the judges can take as long as they want once everything is briefed until they reach a decision. So they do have a lot of discretion in that case. And so who knows? But hopefully, like I said, we can get something over the summer.
Have there been any congressional hearings about Bears Ears?
There has been, and there is some legislation to reform the Antiquities Act, which obviously would affect Bears Ears and everything else, about limiting the size of national monuments and requiring Congress. I think the limit is 10,000 acres. The president could establish 10,000 acres or fewer national monuments, but Congress would have to establish anything greater than that.
Well, I guess when you guys will be extracting some of that testimony too, going forward. I have a feeling there may be some pipeline or energy, and even mining or waste processor resource companies out there that might kind of weigh in on this too. I don't think your work is necessarily going to be wholly easy on this one, but ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Jeff McCoy at the Pacific Legal Foundation, and I'm really happy to follow up on these cases. I mean, sometimes when we talk about them here on radio, we just kind of put out there and we go, that's disturbing or that's good, and then we just kind of leave it. But this is a particular case where it just kinds to be a ball and chain. So best wishes on this one. And Jeff, thanks for explaining where we are on this one. It's good to know.
Well, thank you so much for having me back on, and depending on how long this case goes, maybe I'll be on again in a few months and discuss it again.
Yay, we like that. We like that. All right, good deal. Thanks, Jeff, and ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. There's more coming your way.
Handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 Tree 5, 9er 2-1, grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 Tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 red.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. You know, January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and let's see, we're just a handful of days into the month, and I haven't seen but maybe one or two references to the awareness of human trafficking. So I have the distinct pleasure of having Victor Williams with us and Rick Hoffman with us. Now, Victor, I hope I didn't get this wrong, but was with ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, and Rick is retired police after 24 years. Did I get that right, gentlemen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
Uh-oh.
So I just retired. I was a special agent with Homeland Security Investigations.
Aha. Okay. Thank you. Well, thanks for serving, you guys.
You're most welcome.
Now, look, this is, I think my audience knows that I'm in Florida, and Florida is one of our worst states. Not the worst state, but probably on the short list of worst states for human trafficking. And, there's also an international component to all of this. So, gentlemen, you guys are doing some stellar work here because you're really trying to, one, bring awareness, and two, you're trying to teach a lot of components to this. It's really a topic that nobody wants to have in a discussion, in a learning session that nobody really wants to be in, but I think we're compelled to do that because I don't think the listening audience really understands how big an issue that this is. So I'll throw this out and you guys can take it where you want. No community across the United States is really immune to human trafficking. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, having said that, is there particular areas of the United States that are necessarily worse than others?
Well, since you're in Florida, Rick, if you don't mind, I'll just address a few things since your audience is listening. So what we should know is that, in my opinion, human trafficking is the number one crime in the world, but experts say it's number two, second to drugs. Florida is the number 3 state in the country based on statistics that are gathered by an agency called Polaris, polarisproject.org. They are the organization that mans the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And give you that number real quick is 888-3737-888. So Florida being number 3 in the country, I live in the Miami-Dade area. This South Florida area is one of the top areas for trafficking kids. And just to give you a statistic, for some reason, Broward County is the only one that can get these numbers this way. Out of the 156 kids that were trafficked in 2016, I don't have the 2017 numbers yet. Out of the 156 kids that were trafficked in Broward County in 2016, 80% of them, 133 kids, were community kids. Community kids are defined as kids that are not part of the juvenile justice system, and they don't necessarily come from the poor at-risk side of town. That means it can happen to anyone.
Anywhere.
There was a judge whose 16-year-old daughter was trafficked after she was approached online, just to give you a few numbers of what's happening in our state.
Wow.
From a national perspective, just to go show you, you're on the I-95 corridor. I'm in the middle of North Carolina. We've recovered juveniles here in North Carolina that originated from Florida, and I just got back from the St. Regis Mohawk tribe in the New York-Canada border area, and they have some of the same issues that we're all struggling with. And one of the common misconceptions is I don't think it's intentional, but when you look at images that are associated with advertising or public service campaigns, you see barbed wire, you see foreign-born victims, and we have foreign-born victims, but we forget about the domestic minors. With the prolific, just the amount of use of social media, how easy it is to recruit and solicit, how easy it is to have contact outside of that parental supervision, and then everything that Vic has just said starts to take place.
So, gentlemen, what I'm hearing is the genesis of a lot of this is necessarily done digitally. In other words, it's done online in some kind of social media forum. Not all of it, but I would say a lion's share of that. Did I get that assessment right?
Well, I'll give you this after I do presentations and talk to people and give them the stats that are happening in Florida. I tell them every day your child walks out the door without being prepared with this type of information, they're vulnerable. Every time a kid is online on the internet without proper supervision of an adult, they're vulnerable. And if your child can't come tell you the worst thing in the world that's happening to them, they're vulnerable. And so from that perspective, you have to understand it's all over the place. We have cases where kids were approached. When I mentioned that judge whose 16-year-old daughter was trafficked out of Fort Lauderdale, she was approached from the internet. But we do, and when most people think of, human trafficking, they think of the word taken because it's so easy to see that person as a victim. Does that happen? Yes. Every day in America, someone goes missing and we don't always find them. And the United States is one of the top source countries in the world for trafficking, meaning we're providing victims to the world.
Yeah, I think we live in a society where external validation is very important. So if you think about people, what do they want to know? How many followers do I have on Twitter? How many friends do I have on Facebook? But how often with these kids that they need that external validation of being followed and that constant and consistent approval, do they really know everybody that they're connected with? Because I don't think so.
Heck, I don't even know when people I got 4 friend requests today, and I'm looking at these people with my head turned going, who are you? So it's and these kids are somewhat gullible, but they want so badly to be accepted, and so they accept what should be unaccepted, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, you go ahead, Dick.
No, go ahead, Rick. I'll follow.
I was going to say that's what is insidious now. For law enforcement, you would patrol an area, and there's still people in tracks. But how do you patrol the internet when people are anonymous and that contact is made with anonymity? It's almost like you could go to Backpage and it's like shopping for a person, like on Amazon. And none of that is visible to a patrol officer when they see a car pull up to the hotel. With the interaction, the solicitation, the third-party control of the person that's there, none of that visible from the outside, and that's what makes it more challenging.
And what people also got to understand about this is, and where I would like to see people focus, when I do presentations, I just don't want to give people the ABCs of human trafficking. I'm trying to alert them to something that is so serious that it should be personal. And I want to, present that causes action. We live in this world with so many different issues. Human trafficking is one of many of them, but they're not the source issue. Human trafficking, a lot of bad things happen in somebody's life before they became a trafficking victim or the trafficker. Because we have to ask ourselves, what happened to a human being to treat another human being that way? Mm-hmm. So in my last 7.5 so years of working this, I've learned so much, even about myself, and how culturally I've been caught up in things that I used to do before I learned about human trafficking, that we all add to this. We're all part of the problem. And the main source, when we look at the United States issues of human trafficking, the main source that are creating victims and traffickers, it starts at home. And if we don't start making, paying attention closer to home, and the kids that we're producing, if we're not, really focused on this issue continues because we're not changing mentality. We're not changing culture. When I get an opportunity to present to men, and, you always get the smart aleck guy that says, hey, prostitution, the world's oldest profession. I'm trying to change mindset. So this is what my response is to that is because we're the world's oldest customer, right? Nobody's thinking in that way. It's easy to project on that person that we tag as a prostitute instead of looking at ourselves and what we are doing. And I'll say this last quick thing. We talk a lot about the sex, but 68% of all trafficking in the world is labor trafficking.
Interesting. Interesting. Gentlemen, give us some clues here on how you identify trafficking. Things that the adults, whether you have a child in the game or not, it still behooves all of us to be aware of all of these things. Can you kind of give us a short list of some identifiers?
Go ahead, Rick.
No, go ahead, Vic. You've got the indicators down to a science.
Well, look, some of this stuff is so, part of our lives. So when we talk about indicators of trafficking, when I have my PowerPoint, and I'll send it to you after, and you can give it to your customers. The majority of the PowerPoint talks about the indicators of trafficking. So if you say you're a teacher, and you got a kid coming to school every day and she's dressed better than you, and the parents aren't paying for that, those are signs. When we talk about labor trafficking, the majority of people that are being labor trafficked are people from other countries because they use that against them. If you don't work these extra hours, this less pay, or a colleague taking half your check out of fear of being turned over to Homeland Security, what that person doesn't know is that they get instant protection in this country when that happens. So if you're in the service business and you ask a young lady for her ID and say the gentleman has her ID, why does someone need to hold your ID? You're asking the young lady questions, but this person has all the answers. Basically, what you want to look for is a situation where someone seems to be being controlled by someone else, and your gut would instantly tell you something is not right there. Something's not right there. So we have to start educating ourselves more about this, and thank you for having this show to start this conversation. But it doesn't end here. We need to Google this stuff. We need to YouTube it, because all this stuff is there for us to learn from and kind of like teach our way, unless you join a task force in your area or go to the local police and see if they have programs or trainings or different things like that that can help us all come together to address this issue.
I was personally involved in, I guess it was about 3 years ago now, in July of rescuing, I thought to be only one teenage girl that got lured into getting on an airplane, actually, and ended up in a hotel in Louisiana. As it turns out, there were 14 there. I had no idea, but I was just trying to help somebody out recover their daughter. So what was very curious is I had contacted the FBI, and yet the FBI, when I kind of followed up, it was really a cryptic answer. It was like, yeah, we got her, and there were several others, and that was it. Well, great, but I'd kind of like to take this and bundle it, package it, and tell a larger story here. And he wasn't going to, cough up, and I don't want to use, their sources and methods, but there are certain things that I would imagine that the public should have necessarily known about that I could have, explained and started a dialogue 3 years ago. So I was kind of disappointed in the lack of cooperation I got on that one, although joyful that we were able to rescue as many girls as happened. But when you guys are doing the community engagement and the education on this, I'm sure people that attend these have somewhat of an open mind, but when they leave there, they're probably somewhat stunned and a little bit overwhelmed to the point where they're almost in a panic. Would that be a good assessment?
I think it's a reality check for some parents, because you're sitting there speaking to them, asking them if they know, Snapchat's easy, but some of the other, applications that could be on the phone, how do they access the phone? How often do they talk to their children about internet safety? And you could just see the wheels are turning, and they really haven't had those conversations at all.
And I would add to, just real quick, Homeland Security strategy in dealing with human trafficking are in 3 parts. Understanding the victim-centered approach, which could be a radio show in itself, understanding how people become victims. partnership with the community. Before I retired 15 days ago, I was the coordinator for the South Florida Human Trafficking Task Force. No one fights this fight alone. Community is needed, and an individual can add to that task force to help victims. And the last part is education. Outside of police working against this crime, the only protection that the community has is to educate themselves. And it's so disappointing right now. Here it is, we're 15 days in Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And, you know, where's the stories?
Yeah.
We are sleeping on this.
Gentlemen, several years ago, I was, lived in Atlanta, and I happened to see that a chain of convenience gas stations, I think it was Quick Trip, but I'm not sure, had a sign on their window that this is, and I'm going to get this wrong, so you may have to help me on this. There was a sign on there that said something about this was a safe location. In other words, if people felt threatened in any way, that they had to drop off a baby they just had and they didn't want. If a teenager felt like they were being threatened, it was a place that they could necessarily run to, that those employees in that company would, had been provided some resources to help out. I don't know if it was Quick Trip. I've long since forgotten. I mean, that was many years ago. But I believe that even my local cable provider has something on the side of their trucks that they have been trained in this regard too, because they're driving around all day and they get to see things that the normal person doesn't necessarily see. I'm kind of surprised that there isn't a larger story on other resources that are out there that are available to pick up the phone and call the authorities and say, we got a situation here. Is that a component of this that has not been exploited? Maybe that's not the best word, but used to the advantage of this?
Go ahead, Rick.
Oh, I was going to say, well, there are examples of initiatives. So, for example, in North Carolina, some of the things that have been mandated. So when you go and you're a trucker and you get your CDL, human trafficking is now part of that as mandated training because there are lots of women that are trafficked at truck stops. And so there are mandated initiatives and there are voluntary initiatives such as the hotel industry. So some of those, if you go to their websites and their businesses, they'll have something called the Promise. I may not be stating that correctly, but they train the hotel staff, the cleaning crews, the management to look for sex trafficking. And so there are initiatives like that, but you're correct. I think that there is a lot of potential for industries that have a lot of contact with different types of industries that have a high indice of trafficking that would be very beneficial.
And just to educate your audience a little bit more about this issue, human trafficking laws have only been on the books since the year of 2000. Now, we've had human trafficking way beyond that, but they've only been on the books. So here we are starting our 18th year dealing with this issue. And there, believe it or not, in our country, there's still police departments, there's still government agencies that are still asking about, is this real? The lack of education. And for me, it's a frustration, working it for the last 7 and so years. Enough of Rick or Vic doing these individual pockets. Next week, along with the race, next month, we're going to be in California teaching, officers about this issue. But I'm at a point that this needs to be part of policy. It needs to be part of systems. And one of the things that failed in the state of Florida last year that was up in Tallahassee was a bill that was supposed to start teaching our kids about this issue in their health classes. Now, in health class, you learn about sex. So why can't we learn some of the issues that surround sex? Now, most people didn't know that. Now, that bill is going to come up again, and we need to start educating our kids about that right now.
Why? I get to ask the stupid question because I'm blonde, but why would that initiative have failed the legislature?
Because we have people in our community that believe that if we don't bring the attention to the kids, it won't happen. It's kind of like, let me bury my head in the sand and they won't see me. You know what I mean? So it's really even taking it to a level of people who are making decisions about our way of life. They know about human trafficking, but they still don't get it because they're caught up in a world that I say we only know what we know. Until you open up that box to really dive into this issue and learn what Rick and I know, only then would you start to experience the change in yourself and the passion that needs to go to help fight this fight.
It is a fight, and I'm just rather stunned that this isn't in a headline every day. I mean, I think you guys are doing remarkable work, and I would also argue that the work that you guys are doing, sadly, even has to happen in the first place, but it's got to be taking a toll on you guys when you do these investigations and whatnot. You know, I had interviewed the Jacksonville FBI office a couple of years ago, two of the agents there, that they had broken up a fairly sizable ring. I think it was a online pornography ring in Florida. And, you know, these FBI agents said, you know, we're only assigned to this for a very short time because it gets to them. And then they're kind of moved off because a lot of these agents have, you know, girls that are the very ages that they're investigating, and it's a mess. When you give these classes, gentlemen, are you getting parents that are volunteering and saying, I want to run with this, and I'll take this back to my principal, or I'll take this back to the Girl Scouts, or I'll take this back to the 4-H clubs, or are you getting any kind of force multipliers in this?
Well, being the coordinator for the... Go ahead, Rick.
No, go ahead. I think your answer is going to be more aligned to the question.
Well, being the coordinator for the South Florida Human Trafficking Task Force, and again, following the three prongs that Homeland addressed this issue, and note that I work for Homeland, so I'm not speaking for them. This is Vic Williams, retired Homeland Security Special Agent. As the coordinator, and part of that prong was educating the community. So within the last couple of years, part of our community outreaches, I must have done, 400 or 500, community outreaches. Some parents responded by action. Some kind of like went to sleep. Some became part of the task force. Being the coordinator was one of the best jobs that I had because I worked with the community every day. And when you bring this attention to them, and a lot of them were stunned, but I tell you what, it all depends. I had a parent that was at the Broward Human Trafficking Coalition meeting come in because she heard something about human trafficking, and she was so upset. But she didn't know that we had been trying to work with that school board to give us permission to go talk to schools. Well, I tell you, this one parent alone found a way to get a hold of that superintendent, showed up at the next meeting with the form for us to fill out, and now we can go to schools and start teaching this. Everyone can take action, but it's just how you reach them and how much they want to do. So I hope that answered your question a little bit.
It did. Thank you. I'm a little humbled here that I don't feel like I'm doing enough. And I'm looking at some of the work and where you guys are going here that was sent to me, and thanks is clearly not enough. Blessings to you is clearly not enough. I mean, I feel like you need to have a fleet of trucks with like fellows just like you that are going down that road and making all these stops and saying we need to tell you this story. You guys are busy. You're doing remarkable work, and I invite you back anytime that you want to share something else. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Human Traffic Awareness Month. We've been speaking with Victor Williams and Rick Hoffman here, who are on it. They're on the case, and thank you, gentlemen, for doing the work you're doing and explaining what you can. We've got a community component, we've got an education component, we've got an industry component, we've got an international component here. Any closing words, fellas?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone, and like I said, I just hope that they feel empowered to take action within their communities and to contribute in some way.
And I also want to thank you, and I'll leave you with this. Everyone that's listening to your program, including us, and this is not something to make us feel bad, but when we look at the labor trafficking issues, I want you to pay attention to this. If we're buying products from slave labor, we're not the trafficker, we're not the victim. But if we're buying products from other countries from slave labor, we're all part of the problem.
Part of the problem. I so agree with that. I'm glad you closed with that. Rick and Victor, thanks for being here on the Denise Simon Experience, and thank you for your good work. Come back soon.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you these two 24/7 streams of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. Talk America Radio is a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. Please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. You can contribute monthly or send us a one-time amount. We'll put it to good use continuing to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I've got the distinct honor of having Pastor John Van Pay with us. And he not only is working very hard at the pastor thing, but he's also an author, and he has written Marathon Faith, which I think I like already. I did not get a copy of the book, but I might have to talk with the publisher about that one. So, Pastor John, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Hi, Denise. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you.
Thank you. You know, I kind of like this. In fact, I rather truly like this title because, you know, we tend to go on and off. We turn on the switch and we turn off the switch, and then we turn on the switch when we think we need it again, and we're not very faithful to having some kind of core attachment to a faith. And it alludes to the fact that you're also a runner. Is that correct?
Sure am. I've done over 70 endurance events and triathlons, Ironman, different races, as well as being a pastor and have seen how, God created us physically. There's definitely a running parallel of how he's wired us spiritually and in different areas of our life. So the idea of life not being a sprint, but a marathon, that it's not how we start, but how we finish. And it really is, everyone is excited about the start, right? The start of a race, the start of something new, but it takes faith. It takes some tough grit to be able to endure. And that's why the Bible in Hebrews 12, it says, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And it takes that. Like the starting line, anybody can be a mom or a mother or a father, but it takes a lot of faith. It takes endurance. It takes not giving up to be a great mom or a great dad, or anybody can say their vows on their wedding day and start something new, but it takes faith. It takes something else to be able to keep those vows for 50 years. And what's true in life is true in our relationships as well as in our faith.
Well said. John, is there a particular event or race where you were necessarily truly called upon for your endurance and your perseverance in this?
Denise, I remember in one endurance event, it was called the Tall Texan Half Ironman. It was in the middle of the summer in Boerne, Texas, and it was like 90 degrees. And a half Ironman, you got to swim a mile in the lake and then ride your bike for 50 miles and then do a half marathon, which is 13 miles. And I had spent, like 5 hours out on the road. I was exhausted. And then with 3 miles left, there was a huge hill, and there were runners on the side of the road, and they were exhausted, and I was tempted to quit. And at the base of this hill was a car, and outside of that car window was an individual who was calling out my name and encouraged me not to quit. And as I got a little bit closer, the person in that car was my dad. And he was encouraging, saying, son, keep going, don't quit, you're almost there. And it was the motivation that I needed to run up that hill and cross that finish line. And that became a metaphor for my life that I think your listeners might be able to relate to, because in life we will face that wall. We will have obstacles. Sometimes it's because of our own failures. Sometimes it's someone does something to us to hurt us, and we're tempted to quit. We're tempted for that to take us out of our race. And the reality is, I believe that God is calling us, and he's our Father in heaven. He's like, don't quit. I want to redeem that trial that you're going through and make it part of your story. There's purpose in that pain. Keep going. And when this calling to write this book, I'd hit the wall in life. Like I spent 14 years as a youth pastor, but really because of selfish ambition, I became a workaholic, and I became so consumed with my work that I neglected every area of my life. And I'll never forget walking through the door of my house and seeing my wife, and all of her suitcases were packed and had young children at home. And she said, you're a great pastor, but you're a terrible husband and father. You're not home. You were only home 3 nights last month, and we're going back home. I quit. And sometimes we don't change until we realize what it's costing us. And my selfishness was costing me. My physical health had gotten out of control. I was way overweight and unhealthy. I was losing at home with my marriage and as a dad, and I had to make a big change. And so I confessed it to her and actually resigned my job. And it was during that pain, that valley time, that God birthed in my heart, you need to do this right. And I had a newfound love for Jesus and a relationship with him. And out of that flowed a healthy marriage and being able to be home 5 nights a week from there on out. And really just ministry became more healthy. And I learned that, if you win it, if you think you're winning at work, but you lose in your marriage, or you lose as being a mom or dad, then you don't really win. And for me personally, that all flowed out of a healthy relationship with the Lord.
Pastor, I'm assuming then that was one of the jumping off points on why you wrote the book?
Sure is. Yeah, because I had already hit rock bottom. And sometimes God allows us he says, all right, you want to try it your way? And I had a lot of pride in my life, and he allowed things to fall apart, and I was broken and humble and became more dependent on him. And I found a lot of inspiration from Hebrews chapter 11 and 12, and it says, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And then it lists 20 endurance runners of the Bible that are all men and women, none of them perfect. They're all as ordinary and full of mistakes like you and me. But there was something inside each of them that didn't quit. They didn't give up, and they endured, and they finished the race. And I found something very inspiring from each of those 20 characters of the Old Testament that were mentioned, and I drew strength and be able to apply to various areas of my life. That became the catalyst for this book that I wrote called Marathon Faith. And it's what we see in these endurance runners, that principles, that were lessons and stories that we can apply to our life to help us endure and keep going.
So your book for the reader is really speaking to those who have on and off switches, or perhaps no switch at all for the will or the strength. I mean, people just give up and they just kind of just cast things aside. And if there's a purpose, or if there is a mission, an objective, a dream, your book is really telling them you do, in fact, have the will and the strength to seek that. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you said it very well, Denise. A lot of times we experience failure, and we feel like, man, I mess up in life, and we just quit, and we lose that will or that hope or joy to keep going. And what's interesting about that verse I mentioned, let us run with endurance the race set before us, it continues to go, let us look unto Jesus, he's the author and finisher of our faith. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. And so as we look back, he endured the cross because of the joy set before him. So a lot of times the pain that's in front of us or the storm that we're going through, we're tempted to kind of give up. But if we can go, all right, is there purpose in here? Is it possible that my mess can become a message, that your storm can become your story, that your trial can become a testimony to help others? And I believe that every single one of us are born not to run our race aimlessly, but to believe that there's great purpose. And that great purpose is often found at the intersection of your greatest passion and a great need that's right in front of us. And oftentimes that is something that we've overcome and God's redeemed in our life to be able to almost have a little bit of credibility to speak into others and help other people, whatever that is.
If you were to have your fellow pastors there, or even the heads of other churches, if you will, and you had a chance to make a presentation to them about Marathon Faith, what would you say to them?
I would definitely say, just like life, ministry can be hard, and there are some ups and downs, and people will hurt you. The Bible's full of examples. And one of the endurance runners listed is David. And if you look at his story, his father-in-law, who also was his boss, a man named Saul, was so jealous of him, he tried to murder him. Talking about the worst father-in-law ever. But yet, David did not choose bitterness. He chose to honor and have forgiveness. He had an opportunity to kill him, and he didn't. He said, I'm not going to touch God's anointed. And then later on, even in David's own life, he had a son that betrayed him, who was not loyal because he wanted the crown. He wanted to be king. And David, the scripture says he had a heart after God, and he chose forgiveness. And there's a lesson there that when people hurt us, when people are not loyal, when they betray us, even Jesus had Judas who betrayed him, a close friend. And it's oftentimes I've seen fellow ministers throw in the towel because of a wound with someone in their church family. It could be a friend or a fellow Judas that betrays them. And if we could choose forgiveness and not choose bitterness, it's a choice. And our forgiveness is not based on the degree of offense. It's not based on an apology. received, Scripture says that our forgiveness, we must forgive based on Christ's forgiveness of us. And I know I've committed many sins, and God's forgiven me, and I must choose to forgive others. And there's been people in my church family and friends and staff members who have betrayed, who have hurt my wife, who have gossiped, who have brought division. And those things, the enemy almost used those things to take me out and say, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to be a teacher. But I'm glad that I chose forgiveness and I endured. So I would say that would be, for your audience, for those who are listening right now, you know, life is too short. If you've got some unresolved conflict, or if you have a wound in your heart, to just really try to work it out, to choose forgiveness. And that would probably be the number one message I would speak to a fellow minister right now.
Do you have any particular characters, biblical characters, if you will, that necessarily resonate with you, other than, those that, were running in, as you mentioned, in, Hebrew 11, for instance?
Yeah, I would say I like the story of Moses, too. Moses is an ordinary guy. God called him to a purpose. And his first response was, God, pick someone else. I'm a stutterer. I've committed murder. I've lost the right to lead. And God said, no, you're exactly who I want. And I can remember when God called me to ministry, I was introverted, shy. I didn't talk about him. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed to pray out loud. And God said, it's not what you do, it's who you are. And when I discovered my identity was as a child of God, and then when God called me, I learned that He doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the call. And there's a development there. And in Moses' journey, if you continue to follow it, he became a leader, but he was on the verge of burnout. He was confronted by his father-in-law, and he came to him and said, what you're doing is not good. You're going to burn out. You're burning out the people you're leading, and you need to trust leaders and delegate some responsibilities. I learned in my life, and I always encourage other leaders to not fall into the temptation of trying to do everything yourself and to burn out, but rather equip and train other leaders, delegate responsibilities, have a team mentality and approach, and it'll be better for you. It'll be better for others as well. But Moses is definitely one that I really resonate with.
I'm hearing then that, in total, your message is inspiration. But you're also giving some real tangible evidence on the success of keeping pace in some kind of loyalty. How does one necessarily integrate that into every day, or maybe incidentally because, they find themselves, falling?
Yeah, I think it starts, and I'm a pastor, but more than before that, I'm a follower of Jesus. And it really starts with our relationship with God, for faith. And sometimes people think, even if they believe in Jesus or God, they just want to see Him as Savior, and it's just a small area of their life. And really, that's just a starting line of your race, of your marathon. It's a marathon. It's a long distance, and Jesus says there's going to be trials in life, and really that spiritual, that it affects every area of your life. And when Jesus becomes not just Savior, but He becomes Lord, and out of your loving obedience, you obey His teaching and honor Him and His character and His nature. You want that to be part of your character and nature. The character development, it's not always easy. It's roughing out those sharp edges, but it definitely, you start with seeking Jesus and the kingdom of God, and then He helps you in these other areas. No matter, because we're going to fail, we're going to mess up in different areas, but we need to trust Him and believe that He's going to help us be able to redeem those areas where we've fallen short.
Well said. when I'm sure your parishioners have had some access to Marathon Faith, do they have a particular chapter that they have decided that is one of their favorites, and if they do, why?
That's a good question. I would say Abraham and Sarah. They're two that are mentioned together, and they're married. And one of the number one needs in our community is the need for the man to be a good father, to be a good husband, and the importance of having a healthy marriage and relationship. And that really resonates a lot with people. And what's unique about Abraham and Sarah's story is that later in life, there was a great promise over them that never happened, that they would be the father of many generations. They were quite old by the time that they had a baby named Isaac, and it would have been very easy to have a child-centered marriage. And God, test their obedience and said, "Would you surrender your son to me?" It didn't make sense, but they obeyed, and God spared their son Isaac and blessed Abraham for his faith. I think a lot of times in life, it's easy for a relationship to be centered on a child, centered on a career, centered on even the spouse themselves. And one thing we know is we're not perfect, and we will let each other down. But what we can learn is from Abraham and Sarah, that they centered their focus on God. We know God in His character and nature is a father that we can trust, even though we don't totally understand. So I think a lot of our church family, marriage isn't easy, just like life isn't easy. And this chapter, there's principles that I shared that God redeemed, because I mentioned earlier that I failed in that area. So I offer 5 ways to really help a marriage become healthy. That is really inspired from Abraham and Sarah's story. So that's probably one of the main chapters that help people just in everyday life, and that's the relationship with their spouse.
Your book can, I can see it, that it would touch just about anybody. Is there a particular sector of the population that you feel has maybe the larger need over another to hear your message in this book?
I think if anyone is serious about their faith and not quitting, but really enduring over the everyday obstacles that we face in life, then this book is for them. My experience as an endurance athlete, I learned a lot of lessons that if you're going to finish a long race, then you can't just toe the line or start the race. You got to learn the importance of pacing, training, nutrition. And this book can be a great tool. It's filled with wonderful stories from my life, but more importantly, the endurance runners of the Bible, of how they faced and overcame the various obstacles in life that can easily take us out. And so this book Marathon Faith can be a great tool, like you said earlier, to inspire and encourage readers to be able to continue on. So it's got some humorous stories. I'm pretty vulnerable as a pastor, as just a fellow endurance runner, so it's filled with mistakes I've made. And I think when people read it, they're like, all right, if John, if he can overcome some pretty embarrassing or some mistakes or failures in life, then you know what, I there's hope for me too. And that's what I really hope. I've got some friends, some family members that went through divorce or went through addictions, and it really sucked the joy and passion of life. And man, if we can just hold on, there can be, again, I just want to encourage it, there can be purpose in pain, and we can help others. And that's kind of when we take our eyes off of ourselves, put them on helping others, and through our stories, and man, we can really help each other, and that's my hope.
Pastor, I'm struck that you created for yourself some objectives, and you did everything that you needed to do to achieve those objectives. In other words, you had a target. You had a dream, if you will. And a lot of people out there that are so desperate, they don't have any hope. They don't have any dreams. They just kind of roll along. And those are the people I think I worry about most, that don't have a sight set on anything. It's maybe if only I could get out of here, or wherever their living conditions are. but there's nothing specific beyond that. What would you impart to those people?
Yeah, and I know in endurance sports, whether you're a runner or a mountain biker, if you're in your race, in your journey, and there's an obstacle, whether it's a rock, a root of a tree, and you get panicked and you see that and you fix your eyes on that, you're going to hit it every time. and so I'm an advocate of looking where you want to go. Look where you want to go. And I've made enough mistakes in my life, and a lot of those failures and a lot of those trying to get out, I'm panicking, and maybe there's anxiety, and I'm looking for the quick fix. But really, I mean, again, the scripture says, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes upon Jesus, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. His name, above all other names, is where we will find salvation and find help. So I would encourage people to look unto Jesus. It really starts there. And, I mean, whether it be the area you're struggling with debt and finances, when you really say, all right, first and foremost, before I try to fix that or fix my marriage issues or fix an addiction in my life, a lot of times those fixes and there's wonderful things, there's wonderful programs, but I have seen that those can oftentimes be Band-Aids to a core issue. And again, I'm a pastor, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I really believe that the core issue is the spiritual need. It's the surrender unto Jesus and having a personal relationship. And Matthew 6:33 says, seek first the kingdom of God, and all these other things will be added unto you. So I would encourage to look unto Jesus, to examine your own heart, examine your own life, and what is your relationship with the Lord? And He loves you, He cares for you, and when you surrender and confess Him as Lord and Savior, that becomes the starting line of a wonderful journey. Not always easy, but a wonderful race that is set before you.
Pastor John Van Pay, the book is entitled Marathon Faith. Pastor John, I think your message is well received. It just needs to get out there more to some other people that don't even know that they need you yet. So good luck with the book. And I'm very, very happy you could be with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Thank you. It means a lot. And you can find the book on Amazon, or you can go to marathonfaith.org. It's marathonfaith.org. And thank you, Denise, for helping me get this word out. I really hope that it does encourage and help our listeners.
Delighted to do it, and best wishes. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us. We'll see you again very soon.